You were campaigning with Bernie.
Oh, welcome. We are live, and this is a very exciting grassroots education advocacy episode. I have the honor to welcome former state senator Nina Turner from the great state of Ohio, my home state. We also have the incomparable Dr. Jared Ball from Morgan State University, and also journalist Torin Walker. And we're here to talk about voting in the African American community. We're going to be talking about the importance of voting, the futility of voting, the drawbacks sometimes, if there are some. We'll get into that. In the African American community as well. So without further ado, I am going to take the time to read through the bios of each one of my guests, because I do think that is critically important. And of course, we're ladies first. And so Senator Turner is a defining political icon, right? She is impassioned, motivational speaker, a cable news commentator, former professor of African American history, and a self-proclaimed hell-raising humanitarian. She's a woman on a mission to make the world a better place, and she has built a massive following across multiple platforms, including her recently launched Hello Somebody podcast, which within the first month of broadcast has 30,000 listeners. If you have not checked out her new podcast, Hello Somebody, get on. Make sure you check that out. I believe she interviewed recently former Governor John Kasich as well. And I think that was a good interview. So make sure you guys check that out. She's the first of 7 children born to teen parents. Turner is deeply committed to public service and understood early on how she could use her voice politically to affect change and help those in need. Impressively, Turner served as a state senator from Ohio and national co-chair for the Bernie Sanders 2020 presidential campaign, and as a national surrogate for Bernie Sanders during the 26th Democratic presidential primary. Committed to doing her part to move the nation forward, Turner previously campaigned as a Democratic nominee for the Ohio Secretary of State in 2014. I remember that. I voted for you. Served as a co-chair of the Ohio Democratic Party and served as the Cleveland City Council in Cleveland, Ohio. So, she is a testament to her commitment to service before politics. Turner was able to build an alliance with former Ohio Governor John Kasich. Kasich invited her to serve on the Ohio's task force on community and police relations. It's an initiative to address the tensions and forge stronger relationships between community and law enforcement. The two authored an opinion essay in CNN outlining their work and to improve policing in the state of Ohio, offering hope of a nation that's been battered by uprisings following the fatal police shootings of African Americans like Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Atanya Jefferson, Ahmaud Arbery, and of course, George Floyd. In 2011, The Nation magazine named her the most valuable state senator. And in 2014, The Root listed her as one of the top 100 most influential African Americans in the country. In 2015, Cleveland's Inside Business magazine recognized her as one of the top 25 most powerful people in Northeast Ohio. Significantly, she was among a select group of leaders featured in Politico's Playbook Power list of 18 to watch in 2018. She is a well sought out political commentator. Turner has appeared on numerous national programs and radio shows, including Meet the Press, HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, Comedians Central's The President's Show, The Breakfast Club, and the Tom Hartman radio show. Turner has also been featured in leading print and online publications such as Blavity, Politico, Essence, Vanity, The Hill, and the Afro-American, and more. Welcome, State Senator Nina Turner. Thank you for being here. Next, we want to introduce our brother Torin Walker, who is the founder and editor of Context Media. He's a writer, a journalist, and social media influencer with over 50 bylines and publications, including Teen Vogue, Huffington Post, Splinter, which is formerly Fusion, and Race Bader. He is a producer and director of a documentary called 5 Years, Mike Brown and Ferguson Now, and is currently writing a book on race, power, and culture in American society. Dr. Jared Ball is a father and husband. After that, he's a professor of communication studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Shout out to HBCUs. And is a founder and curator of imixwhatilike.org, is a multimedia platform hub for emancipatory journalism and revolutionary beat reporting. I love it. Ball is also an author of the recently released The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. What? Palgrave 2020. Oh man, without further ado, we just got to get into it. But I wanted you all to know, I took that time to read through the bios because I have so much respect for the three individuals joining us today. And I think that each and every one of our listeners need to know who they are, what they bring to the table. And on this subject, they are definitely experts and can speak to exactly what's happening in our community. And so we're going to get right to the questions. And Senator Turner, I wanted to start with you, right? There's been so much talk, as we know, right? You live in Ohio, you already know like how we get bombarded. Oh my God, because it's such a swing state. Our text messages, the mailbox full of flyers 3 weeks before the election, all the way up into the election, right? Like we just get harassed before it's time to vote. Living in a swing state. I'm now in Maryland, so thankfully, we're reliably blue. I don't get bombarded as much anymore. But how can we really build political power, right? And really make our vote count. And this, again, is from the African American perspective. And the reason why I say that is because just to frame it up for everybody, we've been seeing a lot of bickering, right, on social media. There's a lot of reports saying that, the Trump campaign, of course, is courting African American men in particular. There's been a lot, with Ice Cube and his plan or contract with Black America wanting to get some tangibles for our community, right? So with all of that being said, just how do we really build political power and how do we really make our vote count? And we'll start with you, Senator Turner.
Well, thank you for that question, Sister Zakiya. We, first of all, not to be so predictable. I mean, you just said Maryland is blue, predictably so, and we know lots of states have their patterns. But for Black people, I mean, not for a state, but for our people, we cannot allow any political party to take us for granted. And for far too long, we have one party who has shown in recent history they don't care whether, I'll keep it PG, whether or not we vote for them or not, by and large. And then we have another one who knows, based on the data, that we as a group will vote for them at higher percentages than any other ethnic or racial group in the United States of America. They just know this. And so when you are that predictable, then you don't have to be courted to the same depth as any other group in this country. And so we must come together about what the priorities are for Black America. We are and continue to be, we have been and we are to this day, the canary in the coal mine. And so when you start to address the systemic issues plaguing the African American community generationally and address those things, atone, number one, for the wrong, and then start to address those things, every other oppressed group or marginalized group in this country will, in fact, be taken care of. And then my last point on that point, which is you cannot be on the sidelines in a representative democracy. It is not enough just to vote. Voting is either the beginning or the end of a process. It is not the process. We must be actively engaged at all times. We must hold politicians accountable. And notwithstanding the disaster that is in the White House right now, we get all of that. But what are other folks who claim to be more superior than he is in terms of how to deal with the challenges and the problems of this country, what are they going to do post Donald J. Trump? He must go, no doubt. Neo-fascism must go. But we got to deal with what is the vision and the provision that people have for the Black community and then other poor communities by extension. And in my mind, it's not just enough to be anti-Trump. We got it. We get that. It's a low bar.
That's a very low bar, and I'm glad you said that. And that's actually one of the reasons why I have so much respect for you is that you are clear about the needs of the community, and like you said, poor, other, working class community. You're clear about that, and it's not just enough to be anti-Trump. And that's something that I've been personally very frustrated with over the last 3.5 years. Is that it's been so much focus on being anti-Trump instead of being pro. Let's get these policies and practices in order to make sure communities have what they need to survive. We're now in a pandemic, and we know the results of that. Let's bring in our brother, Dr. Ball. Same question for you, right? How do we build real political power in our communities, right? We just heard from Senator Turner. We know that there's a lot of folks in our community that are apathetic, right? I remember Dr. Amos Wilson once said the apathy is actually cultivated in our communities. It's by design. And I just want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on building political power, and how do we really get what we need out of a system that's never really treated us right in the beginning?
Well, again, first of all, I just appreciate being in part of this panel and part of this discussion, because for me, the biggest problem, regardless of any position any of us take, is that these discussions and differences and debates aren't often allowed to take place in much of the media spaces we inhabit and that we consume. So just from the jump, I think what you already have set up here is putting us in a position that is far superior than we often find ourselves. That apathy you talk about, certainly Baba Amos was correct. Fanon also pointed out that what we call apathy is really the colonial inertia that people are responding to, in part because I think a lot of that apathy is more politically astute and conscious than people give it credit for. It's a response to what people see the system not doing. So what I would like to see us do is just become more organized around that basic logic. And as I've started calling myself, become Malcolm X voters, and which is to say that we actually adhere to the policy of Malcolm X when it comes to how we engage the vote. Specifically, as he said, as one of his final statements with the Organization of Afro-American Unity, was that we needed to be developing our own parties, our own certainly blocks, our own candidates, our own platforms and campaigns, and not just entering the process as a group of people being more or less berated and told has to support the lesser of one or another evil, when we're not even engaging that element of the process with an organized platform and set of agenda items. So that's the way I would like to see us move to be more effective, so that we're not simply becoming one or maybe two issue voters, which allows us to be manipulated, or to become, as Malcolm said, the political chumps that I think many of us are forced into being. And that way, I would think we would see more inspiration among the roughly 100 million non-voters, in general, across racial lines, who would find more excitement and inspiration to support these other kinds of electoral efforts. So if we did that, I think we would find not only greater support among Black people, but we would find that those platforms often would be supported by other people in this country, and we would see a different rise of kind of campaigns and candidates, and I would think political victories.
I think that's right. I would agree with that assessment. I'm often so frustrated because these campaigns, they come out and they basically beg people to vote. Some of it, and I'm not speaking for y'all, I'm speaking for me, some of it is damn near bribery. You feeding people, offering people rides to the polls, but where is they ride when they need a ride to go to the doctor's office? You know what I'm saying? Because to me, it's like, you want to huddle people in because the vote does matter. Don't get it twisted. The vote matters, but it's mattering for your particular interest, and you're not concerned after the vote about the interest of the communities that you was going in and feeding and offering rides to. That's my issue, and I've had an issue with that for a very long time. And Senator Turner and I can talk about this offline, but I got something to say about the Montgomery County Democratic Party down in Dayton. Let's bring it up to Brother Torrin. I want to hear what you have to say on this question, brother. And I know that you actually have been very involved on social media, pushing back against these pathological, horrible narratives that are being garnered right now by people on the left. These are not right-wing people calling Black men every name under the book. Can you talk about it?
Well, I can talk about that. It's very disappointing, but it's not surprising that some of these things are happening because a lot of the people who are pushing these hateful narratives about Black men are really people who are so tied to the establishment that they're willing to turn their backs on their people and the concerns of their people to get whatever they can by get some kind of applause by doing these things. And there's a game I like to play sometimes. If you remove people's images from their statements, try to figure out whose rhetoric is coming from white supremacists and which rhetoric is coming from people who claim to be for us and claim to be supporting Black people, supporting Black concerns. I think it's very dangerous. People, you can say that it's social media and you can say that it doesn't really matter, but we've already seen the power that social media has to influence elections and influence public opinion and that sort of thing. And when you have people who work in politics, who work in academia, who work in media, who are pushing these hateful narratives with no data, with no real understanding of what the conditions are that make people feel the way they are, that's extremely dangerous. And it also gives people who are white supremacists license to say even more hateful things or enact even more hateful legislation because they have Black people backing them and they use them as a shield. Now, as far as your question about how do we build political power, I think we have political power. I think what we have to do is make people who come for our vote respect that power. They don't really show up, as you said earlier, they only show up every 2 to 4 years to come clap in the church, pick up a baby or two, give you some fake tangibles and a little bit of representation, and they leave and you never see them again. And the people who are in power and the people who are set up to represent us allow that. We have to hold the people who represent us accountable. We have to hold the people from block wardens to pastors in these churches, people who facilitate these things. We need to talk to them and make them accountable to their constituents and the people who they serve, first of all. And then be sure that we check the people who come into our communities and who want our vote and be sure they have tangibles for us outside of pandering.
No, I think that's right. The pandering is a little ridiculous at this point, and I've seen a lot of it. And so to that piece, I did not see a lot of optimism in 2016. I was still an Ohio resident at that time, and actually called the election early for Trump, based on what I was seeing, not just in poor parts of Dayton, but what I was seeing in wealthy suburbs of Dayton, and there were Trump signs everywhere. And so how do we just encourage optimism among our people, right? When it comes to this idea of voting, because it seems to me, at least, from what I'm seeing from a large segment of the community now, and I think it's up in the air what we'll see pan out next week. But there are people in our community who are like, even with Trump, they are still like, Trump, Biden, like, there are people in the community who are like, I'm not voting for neither one of them. And so, how do we address that in a way that doesn't pathologize our people, right? I'd love to just hear really quickly, from any of you who want to jump in on that, just what your response is to people in our community who say, I'm still not voting for either one of them because neither of their plans are strong enough or has a Black agenda. I hear a lot of that. No Black agenda, no vote.
Well, it's bigger than the presidential, though, is
right.
What I want people to understand. And from a historical perspective, and I don't know how we've gotten out of this as a people. James Baldwin once said, know from whence you came. If you know from whence you came, there's virtually nowhere that you cannot go. And there's something about our cultural disconnect that has caused many of us to pick up other people's bad habits. So I will say from a historical perspective, and we have to build on it in the 21st century. I mean, people like us and other leaders and I'm not even just talking about people in elected office. We all have a role and a responsibility to be a leader in our own right, citizen leaders or community leaders. But I'm just talking about the historic import of our obligation as Black people, especially Black people, to get out there and vote, come hell or high water. That's what I believe, because our ancestors gave so much that we still can't even fathom what they gave. Some died, some lost their livelihoods. Some had to walk 6, 10, 20 miles to go vote and then be turned away from the poll. So we owe them, and we owe ourselves, and we owe future generations. So I want to put that there. The other part of this is that there are other offices to vote for.
That's right.
Or attorney general in that state? Who are the DAs? Who are the judges? Who are your council members? Who are your mayors? Who are the township trustees? Who are the people who sit on the school boards? So often we are mesmerized by the shiny object that is the presidency and the Congress, but meanwhile on the streets, the government that is closest to the people matters the most because it can have the quickest impact. And I say that not just as a citizen, but as somebody who served the mayor, worked in the mayor's administration, was a Cleveland City Council member before I went on to the state legislature. So those other offices matter. And then lastly, vote mad as hell. I mean, you can acknowledge that you're mad and sad or whatever the emotion that you are feeling, because I'm not somebody that I don't do vote shaming. I'll leave that for the professionals who want to take away the agency of Black folks and other folks who are our Sister Zakiya just being very clear that they really are for none of the above.
Right.
But I want to say because every election is important. Yes, this 2020 election is important because President Trump has just brought up to the surface what was already there down deep.
Right.
I want to deal with that. It's not just about him. It is about what he was able to stoke says about America that I want to get to. So neo-fascism is dangerous in the short term, no doubt. But neoliberalism is dangerous in the long term. Hello, somebody.
Amen. Hello, somebody. Hello, somebody. Yes. Any one of the brothers want to jump in on that one?
Certainly. Go ahead, Torrin. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that really, if you want to encourage people to have optimism, first of all, you have to do what you do with anybody you know in your personal life. You have to stand on your word and respect their concerns. And if you don't do that, nobody's going to be optimistic about that. Let's be honest, we had 8 years of optimism. And before that, we've had 44 different Donald Trumps. What people are dealing with, Black people are dealing with, is not new. This is not, I know it sounds new to people who are just now coming to this party and everything, and they're coming to this fight. But look, since we landed on these shores, we've dealt with 10 times worse than Trump. Most likely, we're probably going to deal with people way worse than him. I think there's too much focus on Donald Trump. Not to say that he's not a fascist and he's not incompetent, but there's so much focus on him that if you take focus away from Donald Trump, you have to look at the things that are going on, whether he's there or not, regardless of who is in office. And I want to talk on Sister Nina's point. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We do have to vote. There are votes outside of the presidential race that are very important. But as far as like optimism, I think we have to even move away from this thing about giving people optimism and hope and this sort of thing. We have to give people tangibles, and we have to give things that are going to definitely affect their lives. We've had optimism. We need progress, and we need policy, and we need platforms.
That's perfect. That's perfect for me. I was going to say this is almost something very similar. I'm not advocating the development of optimism at all. I'm advocating the development of political education and organization, and to organize around the righteous anger that I and most of us feel. I did vote angrily, but I voted with sort of pride for the Green Party, because the platform that they represent is something that I can get behind and that most of us would want. And because I live in Maryland and this blue state, it makes it easier, but I would have done that anywhere in the hopes of trying to develop, if there's people want to talk about optimism, get them their 5% of the electorate so they can get federal funding and build. Or people don't want to do that. Check out the People's Party that's being developed by Nick Brana and others. Check out the Gloria La Riva and Leonard Peltier campaign. So I fully agree. People fought for us to have the right to vote, not for the right to vote, but really for us to have power. So when I'm in touch with my movement elders and my godfather and others who are on the front lines of that struggle, they remind me all the time that they were not on. In fact, my godfather says those of us who were on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. First of all, he says if everybody who claims to have been there was actually there, the bridge would have collapsed. And what he and what he also said is that he says all the time is that the point wasn't just to get the right to vote; it was to get power. And if voting doesn't achieve power, then we have to do something very differently. And that's why I keep advocating some wildly different engagement with electoral politics. But then lastly, I fully agree with what others have said, that this is just one element of a broad arrangement of tactics and endeavors we have to engage if we really want to have optimism or something akin to freedom.
Absolutely. And Go ahead.
May I just say what I want to add to what Dr. Ball said? I totally agree with the Movement for a People's Party with Nick Branna and others. Please look that up. But we have another, it's called Our Black Party, OUR blackparty.org, that is being by some young brothers. Honorable Candace Hollingsworth, she's a mayor, and then also Dr. Wes Bellamy. And you all may recall, you read about this because P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, is very much supporting this. So that's another way, because I saw a brother put up about being engaged in movement politics. So I just want to add to what Dr. Paul said, that there are lots of other options out there. And then just one other point, and I will be really quick about this. I saw a sister, you're probably going to get to the question, that she feels as though talking about the ancestors shames us, is a way of shaming. And I just want to respectfully disagree with that. We have to know from whence we came in order to know where we are going. And if any group of people is out, and I say obligation, and we can agree to disagree. Stephen Covey once said, seek first to understand and then to be understood. It is not a shame to look back on our collective journey and reflect on the hell that our ancestors caught for us to even be able to type the words. I think it's shaming to be able to vote. We, more than any other group of people, when it comes to voting, Dr. Ball is right about the power dynamic, and Brother Walker, this is a power dynamic to this. We got to understand that not through our head, but through our heart, about what it meant to be killed, or to be called into an office and told you're going to lose your job if you don't vote this way or that way. Or for Black women, even when the suffragettes, even with the 19th Amendment, still could not vote. We had to fight. We were the last to actually get the right to vote. I say those things as a motivator, not to shame people to do anything that they don't want to do, but we have to have an understanding that surpasses what's in our head. It has to be in our soul. And so I thank God for the generations of people who fought to vote, even if they never got the chance to. So we couple that with what we know today. So I just had that really gets to me. And I respect the sister's opinion, but I'm just expressing mine about why it is so important that.
But let's lean into that. Let's lean into that. Thank you, all three of you. But let's lean into that because, and I was going to go to another question, but I actually do want to lean into this a little bit. And this also comes from my experience too, Senator Turner, when I was in Dayton, still living in the state of Ohio in 2016, and I did encourage people voting, right? But And this was actually, now that I think about it, since Black men are the new boogeymans, right, of voting. But back then, it were mostly brothers who did not want to vote for Hillary Clinton. And none of those conversations had anything to do with because she was a woman. It was because of her rhetoric and the policies because keep in mind, she was a first lady during Clinton's administration, but she wasn't a passive first lady. She was a very active in policy first lady. And these brothers remembered that. They recounted that and said, well, why would I want to go, with her and vote for her? But I remember too, in that election, Senator Turner and others, that there were very important down ballot issues, even county, commission races, city commission races. And I was able to convince most of the people that I talked to that if you weren't going to vote at the top of the ticket, or if you decided to vote for the Green Party, because the Green Party was on the ballot in Ohio, then that's fine. Because I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, and you're right to have your righteous indignation against the people that the main Democratic Party keeps anointing to be, the presidential candidates. People have a right to not want to deal with neither one of them. However, I was able to convince them to vote on the very important school board election that was during that time, all the other local issues, because to your point, it is very important. Most of the things that actually directly impact us is at the local level. But there's so much energy around the presidential election because there's so much money. There's so many groups flying into Ohio. Oh my God, all these people flying in, going door to door, all of this stuff. So people kind of get turned off by that. But at the same time, I have to talk about, and I would love for others to jump in on this. There is this idea or this policy brief that came out of, I believe, the Nixon administration about how to deal with Black people around benign neglect. And it was a New York Times piece I shared just the other day. It was from, I believe, 1972. And we can literally see in our communities how when we do vote Democratic, because Black people are the largest subgroup in this country that primarily vote for Democrats, but it seems to us, right, and others like Ice Cube and everybody, what are we getting in return? So when people say that, okay, I don't want to vote for this person because we currently live in a duopoly, or oh, hell, I want to vote for Trump or a Republican, right? Why is it that we go instantly to pathologizing the people instead of critiquing the party that continues not to deliver for our community? That's the question.
That preaches. I'm gonna let the jump in.
If I may, the first problem is that it's the Democratic Party and its own sponsors, corporate and otherwise, that are funding most of the elite media and the people doing all the punditry that host all these conversations to begin with. That's why I started my comment praising this panel just for its existence, because there is no financial incentive into most commercial media spaces, Black or white for that matter, to invite people on who would be critical of the Democratic Party. We've seen the Pew Research study that confirms what we've already known, just came out recently, that shows overwhelmingly, and MSNBC is even worse than Fox in terms of its overall capturing, in terms of its overall audience being almost exclusively the Democratic Party constituents. So they're not even talking to anybody else. So there's no financial incentive. Of course, MSNBC, owned by an enormous international conglomerate with private equity groups, investment, and all kinds of stuff. There's no financial investment or incentive to invite conversation that goes left of the Democratic Party or invites left critique of the Democratic Party, which is why we don't often see it. And the same thing goes for Black targeted and Black commercial media, which is trying to also capture the same ad revenue coming from the same sources. You know, my late great mentor, Dr. Ron Walters, in one of the last pieces that he wrote for the Black press was a critique of the then Barack Obama campaign in 2008 for taking the Black community for granted, politically accurately, unfortunately, but specifically because the Democratic Party was not then giving the amounts of money that Black press, commercial media outlets were used to garnering. So this is a major part of the problem. We cannot even have conversations that would allow for this kind of criticism, which is one of the reasons, by the way, Ice Cube is getting so much backlash from the so-called liberal and progressive left, because he's inviting a criticism of the very party that claims to be their only electoral outlet, and that sponsors all of their appearances, and so on. So anyway, that's just at least part of the reason why we can't even have these kind of conversations. And again, why I really appreciate you hosting this.
Thank you, brother. Torin, you wanted to hop in?
Yeah, I want to go off of what Dr. Ball said. I think there's an issue with the level of discourse that we have in media as well. If you take a look at some of the debates that were going on back in the 70s, even in the 80s, even if you go back to the Baldwin-Buckley debate, there was a level of respect and discourse with people who had opposing views, where people who were diametrically opposed to each other could come together and say that, look, this is what I believe. I don't agree with what you believe. You believe this, but let's try to hash these issues out and let the public decide. We don't have that anymore. What we have right now is sort of this reality show based idea of what discourse is supposed to be, where somebody like an Ice Cube can be slandered and attacked, or even putting up the idea that we deserve something for our vote. He didn't say that he was going to go work with Trump. He didn't even say he was going to work with Biden. He just said, I have a plan. Let's see what we can get as Black people with this plan that I have, whether it's good or not. Let's see who speaks. He got attacked for that. And I'm also, I want to get in about that. I want to get into this idea of who's qualified to speak. I think there is very much a buffer class of people who are Black, who work in media, who work in academia, that I mentioned before. Their jobs are depending on keeping the rest of the Black masses, poor and working class, in line. And if you do anything that moves left of what the establishment Democrats say, you're going to have a problem. But the people who fund them are not going to be able to go out there and say anything hateful or use any kind of slurs. So what they do is they get those people to get in front of that and do that for them. And I think that's very dangerous.
No, I think that's right. And I'm glad that we're leaning in a little bit, because this is a good segue to my next question in terms of our brother Ice Cube, who has been dragged mercilessly, again, not from right wingers, but from the left, people who are supposed to be progressive, people who are, supposed to be for us and for justice, right? How can you articulate it being injustice for coming up with a plan to specifically address the needs of the African American community? And let's just go through a few statistics, right? When you look at education, that's what we do here at Citizen Ed. That is what my expertise is as a racial justice thought leader, but also as an education justice thought leader. I mentioned at the top of the hour, I started my education justice work in the state of Ohio and had an opportunity to interact with State Senator Nina Turner in her last term around these issues, pushing back against criminalization of Black and children in our schools, repealing Ohio's zero tolerance law, which we were finally able to do, and also have Governor Kasich sign House Bill 318, which prevents suspensions and expulsions pre-K through third grade across the entire state. That started with poor and working class Black mamas in Dayton, Ohio. And we eventually expanded across the state and began to work with the ACLU and Children's Defense Fund and others to get that kind of work done. And I'm saying that to say this, and I don't expect, I'm not trying to get anybody in any trouble, but I went to my Black state representative, who was a Democrat, to get him to work with us on this issue. And I will say his name was Fred Strayhorn. He's also now termed out. He would not touch this issue because the teachers union donated to his campaign. I was able to get State Senator Peggy Lehner, who was a Dayton area Republican, and also the chairwoman of the Education Committee, who controlled the committee and could get a bill out of the committee. And eventually, after about 3 to 4 years, we were able to get her to get the bill passed and signed into law by a Republican governor. So I say all of that to say that politics is very nuanced. Had I been one of those kind of Black people who wouldn't even talk to State Senator Lehner, we would not have a state law on the books right now that prevents the criminalization of all children, but the children who were most impacted were African American children. So I'm not here talking about this stuff as if somebody that's sitting on the sidelines and don't know how politics and policy works, at least at the state level. So that's my experience with it. But I wanted to get to what Ice Cube talked about. And the reason why I preface my story with that is because he got jumped on for even talking to the man. He got jumped on for even he didn't even talk to Trump. Number one, he never talked to Trump. Let's just get that out of the way. He talked to his team. And so and before that, if we remember, it was Killer Mike that people were jumping on for talking to the governor of the state where he lives and do business. What is wrong with our community where we are so in line with one particular party, in my opinion, that doesn't serve us well at all, that we won't even talk to the people in power to make the decisions we need them to make? Can y'all lean into that? Or why people are jumping on Killer Mike and Ice Cube for trying to get something for Black people from the people who are currently in power?
Since I would say that, as I opened up, we picking up other people's bad habits. It just makes no sense not to have the conversation. As Brother Walker laid out, he never even said, going back to Cube, that he was endorsing anybody. He was just trying to have the conversation. And as the story goes, because not only did he put that story out on Twitter, I got some inside connections. He tried, as we know, to meet with both. He was told by the Democratic side, wait until after the election, and Trump's people say, hey, come on in, let's hear what you got to say. Whether or not Trump administration is going to do or not do, that's not what we're debating right now. We're debating that one said wait, and I remember the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said wait almost always means never, and the other one said let me hear what you have to say. We can debate whether or not they're going to lie about it or pretend, but that wasn't the issue. That's number one. Number two is we should not allow anybody to take away our agency. Black people are not children. We have agency. We have thoughts. And the same people who claim that they're better than the Trumpites, and I hate to keep using that as an example because that's just how polarized we are right now. You got these same white liberals who claim to be different, more enlightened, and Black women lead, and Black girl magic, and all that. And the minute a Black girl or a Black boy, and I'm using that sarcastically, but Black men and Black women step out of line, that gives them the license to critique us or to malign us, not to critique, because it's all right to critique somebody, but to then jump on Ice Cube and say he didn't have the right. What gives you the right to tell him what right he does and does not have? We should never, ever do that. Disagree on the issue. If you want to look at the plan and say, I think it's not good enough or this is BS, that's one thing. But to jump on Cube, and there was an actor, and I can't remember his name right now, but I saw his tweet, and somebody that's listening to us may remember and could tell us who this is. But he tweeted something like, I wonder, in reference to Ice Cube, is he Ice Cube or Snowflake? Something like that. He wasn't even one of us. It's one thing for us to have a family conversation. It's another thing that when Black people jump into that void, like into the debate like that, tearing down somebody else, then that gives others license. Your point about Killer Mike, you have, Killer Mike making things happen. Michael Render is a dear friend of mine. And so while all these other people talking about it, he is about it. I can tell you as somebody that has served in political office, sometimes you got to sit across the table from the devil. If you want to call people that, sometimes you got to sit across the table. Let me back it up with the opposition to try to get something done for your people. And that don't mean you got to sell your soul to do it, but you do have to have the conversation. That comes with a political maturity. And as you said, Sister Zakiya, understanding nuances. I want to give an example. In 2014, Tamir Rice, a young Black boy, 12 years old, was shot on a playground in my city in November. And Sister Zakiya, that was my last term. The clock was ticking.
Yep, I remember. Yep.
He was shot. I could have easily said, well, it's my last term. I only got, 45 more days to go. But you know what I did? I picked up that phone and I called Governor John Kasich. And I got a meeting with him, and I took some of my sister legislators with me. And what was said was that, Governor, you have the power. We don't want to see the city of Cleveland erupt. We don't want people to have to come outside and protest. We need to jump on this right now because we already know that people are hurting. And that what happened to that little boy was wrong, and we got the power to get in front of it, not behind it. And you know what he did? Yeah, Governor John Kasich, who is a conservative, with Senator Nina Turner, that's a progressive. He said, you know what, Senator, you are right. And he called in his staff and they wrote an executive order right then and there on the spot. And the very next day, we were announcing the Governor's Task Force for Community and Police Relations, a task force that traveled the entire state of Ohio. And you know what happened in Ohio? Not one incident of violence. You hear me? Because we put people who had the people's power around the table, and we went to the people. We went to Dayton. We traveled in Cleveland, Cincinnati, all across. 600-page report came out, and we kept every testimony from the citizens of this state who had something to say about community and police relations. Now, that was in 2014 into 2015, light years ago. But see, that's what leadership does. I could have sat back and said, he's a Republican. I'm not going to go to him. Oh, no, hell no. I went to him and said, Governor, we have to do something. You have the power. I have the power. My other sisters and brothers who are elected, we got the power to hear the people's voices. That's exactly what we did. And we created standards. Now, things need to be up more, but we started the process and we were the first. We were on the cutting edge. John Crawford III was shot around that time.
Yep.
A 27-year-old was in a store, Walmart, picked up a weapon that sold in the store. A white person called the police on him and he was killed. The Brelow case that just came down in Cleveland, where you all may recall there was a Black couple. They were driving their car back.
I remember.
It was called in that they were shooting at the police. It was a chase through the city of Cleveland all the way to East Cleveland, like 130-something bullets shot into their car. One officer, Brelow, the only one that was charged and went to court, got on the hood of their car and shot 40-some times inside their car, killed those people. All of those things happened within a span of time in the state of Ohio. And we didn't have one incident of violence. And I believe one of the major reasons why we did not is because the people who were elected to serve and hear the voices of the people got in front of it right away. So that's just one example. So again, that was a long way for me saying that, yes, politics is nuanced, and sometimes you got to call the question and you got to get to acting. So some of these people just want to be haters just to be haters. Again, they talking about it while other people are about it. And it's a shame that we would malign each other for somebody else.
Right. I mean, right. Especially for somebody that ain't doing nothing for black. Okay. Okay. Go ahead, brothers. I'm gonna let y'all get in.
First of all, I think it's important that, well, I would want to start off by saying first that while I don't at all agree with the tactics of either Killer Mike or Ice Cube, I fully agree that both of them have every right to engage the process and advocate their position. And then and then that's the point. Then the rest of us should be involved in the discussion and the debate. So no, I don't think that either of them, in terms of developing black banks or black capitalism or seeking out investment for black business is an answer. In fact, I know is scientifically been proven historically it cannot solve the issues of economic inequality for black people. So I don't agree with them tactically. But again, the reason that the backlash that they're suffering.
Really quickly, Ice Cube's plan did not just include his did not just include what you call black capitalism. He actually included a lot of different things, at least from what I read.
No, I know.
As you know, Dr. Derek Hamilton, who is a stratification economist, actually worked with Ice Cube on that part of it as well. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, and Hamilton and I talked about that in a recent interview. People can check that out at imixwhatilike.org. But my point is that there was a component of the plan of Ice Cube's plan that focused on the $500 million or $1 billion investment in black businesses. And Mike's plan to develop the Greenwood Bank, is again part of the mythology that I and others are arguing is not the solution. But again, to say that they don't have a right to engage the process is nonsense. And to say, because first of all, if they don't, then we turn around and complain that celebrities don't get involved. Then when celebrities get involved and don't do what we want them to do, we say they should shut up and just be celebrities. So it's not fair to do that. My concern with their involvement is as someone more radically to the left and someone more attuned and a part of grassroots politics and organization is that our efforts, the grassroots political efforts, have not been strengthened or organized well enough to incorporate these brothers in the work that they're trying to do, so that they're left to go off to find help with what I would consider more right-wing and conservative efforts that aren't going to help. But that's more about what I and others have not been able to successfully build, or in part what the other concern is that they are being criticized because by a group of people who are paid well to make sure that, as everybody else on the panel has already said, that black people don't go anywhere else with the vote. And Sister Turner has had at least one of my favorite exchanges with one of my more famous colleagues at Morgan State over this very issue about black punditry being in place only to argue for, as I would remember or reinterpret the exchange, white conservative politics, and just tell black people, how dare you try to enact your agency and go in directions that we, the political pundit, well-funded political punditry, are put in place to deny you or to discourage you from. So that would be, anyway, so that's where I think that most of the disingenuousness is most readily apparent, and is in this critique of Mike or Ice Cube, that is really just about people feeling upset that their allegiance to the Democratic Party and the funds that they get for that allegiance are being threatened.
Can I speak up?
I
just want to speak to that really quick, because my background is in media and I worked in mainstream media for a while. What you're seeing also is a lot of people who are upset with people like Ice Cube and Killer Mike, and people who feel like they have the ear of people who have authority and power, because they feel like the people who are attacking them feel like they should be the quote unquote Negro whisperer to go to white power and say that you need to speak to me. I speak for these people. Don't listen to them because they're lower class dudes. They don't have my degrees. They didn't go to my fraternity. They didn't do everything I did. Talk to me because I'm the person you need to speak to. That's really what a lot of that boils down to. Some of these people are just haters because they don't like the fact that we have a situation now where power doesn't have to speak to the people who have been appointed to speak for you. People who have voices and people who are connected to people can talk to anybody they want to. And a lot of people who are deeply embedded in the establishment Democratic Party feel like their positions are being threatened because they're no longer the go-to person for everybody to speak to. Everybody has a voice and everybody deserves a voice. Now, one more thing to wrap that up for what I have to say is I've heard that Malcolm X quote about entertainers should not be leaders more in the past week and a half than I've heard in the past year. People have been using that very arbitrarily because, as you said, Dr. Ball, and as you said, Sister Nina, people have absolutely no problem with listening to entertainers who say what they want them to say.
Exactly. You know what I mean? When Cardi B was talking to Joe Biden, ain't nobody say nothing bad about her.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you're gonna let Cardi B speak to Joe Biden, what's wrong with Ice Cube speaking to whoever he wants to? And also that also disregards a history of activists who work in athleticism and who work in entertainment, from Paul Robeson to Josephine Baker to Sidney and Harry, funding a lot of people for the March on Washington, all the way to Muhammad Ali to Colin Kaepernick. You know what I mean? There's a continuum of this sort of thing of Black people who are in entertainment and in athleticism, in athletics, who are using their platform and using their position to speak out on things that they're against as far as injustice and the way Black people are treated in this country. So you can't use that arbitrary quote to attack people you don't like and then let everybody come in if they do what you want them to do. It's not fair.
Malcolm's best friends with Muhammad Ali and Sam Cooke. I mean, come on now.
Talk about it. They're taking it out of clearly. I mean, Zakiya, I want to say to Dr. Ball, I think it could be all of the above. I need to push back a little bit because Michael Render is a dear friend of mine, and as he has always reminded me, he was an activist before he started singing and dancing. There are different pathways to get to the whole, and so for him in particular, I know exactly what he is working to do. And not that you're saying that he doesn't have the right to do it, but I got to let people know. Michael Render was an activist. He sat at the feet of many of the great civil rights trailblazers because he grew up in the ATL. And I applaud what he is doing in the banking. So I just can't let, don't hate on my boy.
I would say for people who don't know, Michael Render is Killer Mike's real government name, because folks might not know him by that. But I also will say too, the brother has been also very supportive of grassroots activists. I would say personally, he's been very supportive of me and the organization that I co-founded in Dayton, Ohio, Racial Justice Now. He's been very supportive in highlighting our work. Every interview he does, he always says, like, it's not about me, it's about these group of activists and all across the country. I need you to talk to them. They are the experts. So I want to make sure that I say that he's not trying to be the leader. He's doing a part of what he believes. And I have to say too, as well, Dr. Ball, and I've already said that I want to bring you back to have a larger conversation. Black people are broke though. Like the homeless rate and the homelessness rate, who makes up homelessness in this country, 40 to 50% of those people are Black people, right? So there is an issue around having access to basic needs. Right now, we live in a global capitalist economy, and so I feel like in that we're living in global capitalism. How then do Black people figure out how to have their basic needs met? Does it have to be Black capitalism to deal with trade and commerce, to open up a local Black business? Because I have my great grandfather, I will tell you, in Alabama was one of those Black business owners in the segregated South in Alabama. And he was able to buy 100 acres of land that we still own to this day in Alabama. And to me, when you're not able to get a job, or you don't want to go and work for a racist person or in a racist environment, to me, it makes sense to be able to have some self-respect and own your own business. He didn't have a business where he exploited his workers. He actually had the only grocery store in a little small town in the Black Belt that actually served the community. So I guess, at some point we got to have a fuller conversation about what we mean by Black capitalism. Do we mean that we're against Black people owning mom and pop stores and businesses in our community that support the community, but also supports themselves and the generations that come behind them?
What I'm just simply saying is, again, this is not personal, and I don't have any problem with anybody engaging politics or the struggle. In fact, we need more people to be involved. I'm just simply saying, and I'm happy to come back for a longer conversation on this, that it's not that they're bad people for trying this. It's just that historically it's been proven that this is not a way to close economic or material gaps or inequality. So I'm just simply saying Black capitalism cannot.
Right.
What we need is public policy and political movements and social power. That's our real power. Our power is not in developing businesses, et cetera. And people can't do what unfortunately your family has been one of the few able to do. Because, I mean, for instance, 4 white men in this country own more land than all Black Americans combined. So there isn't land for us to purchase or work or anything. So there's a lot more to say about that. But so my issue isn't that I think that Killer Mike or others are bad or attempting to hurt their own people. What I'm just simply saying is the efforts that they are engaged in have a long history of being mythologized and encouraged so that we would be discouraged from engaging the political system in ways that would radically redistribute all the wealth that we're all generating collectively to begin with. So the issue isn't can we own more businesses and develop more entrepreneurial or capitalistic endeavor. The issue is, can the wealth that this society creates that we all contribute to, whether we own the pizzeria or buy the pizza, can that wealth be redistributed beyond the 1% that have everything, or within Black America, the 10% that take almost all the wealth within our community? We have to start looking at that issue as well. And then very lastly, I'm happy to come back and talk more about this as well, but I've just been part of a group that completed a new report on the impact of COVID on Black businesses, in part in which we've also looked at the history of Black businesses. And the sad reality is they have never been in a position and can never be in a position to on their own create the support that, as you're talking about, would help the broader community. Because to your point, we don't have any money to invest and to consume enough to generate the wealth, to get the kind of expanded investment, to end those businesses, to become big enough as entrepreneurial endeavors or banks to actually say. And by the way, small white banks haven't ended the condition of poor white communities any more than poor Black or small Black banks or Black banks in general can solve the conditions of Black people's economic inequality. We need public policy, movements, organization, and political power.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely getting beat up a little bit in the comments, so we're gonna
Sure.
definitely have you back.
I mean,
Anytime.
Go ahead, Sister Nina.
Yeah, it's all of that. I'm not saying I don't disagree with you, Dr. Paul, and I will say for Michael Render, Killer Mike, he hasn't been engaged in all of those things. And I hear what you're saying. I hope that you do understand that I understand what you're saying. Just that Michael is a dear friend of mine, and I would be remiss if I didn't. He definitely understands that policy. You're absolutely right. Government is the biggest player. It has the biggest stick. And government is the one that allowed what happened to our people generationally to happen. And we need government to undo what it did. And that's basically what you're saying. And Michael understands that too. What he is working on, that's just one of many things that he's working on. It's part of a greater whole. But I totally agree with you on the policy part. And that's why part of why voting does matter, because it is about the power, who has the power and how they wield that power, whether or not they're wielding that power on behalf of the people, or are they wielding that power on behalf of the less than 1%? Are they engaged in keeping the status quo, or do they have a vision that will provide provision for people? So I think we're all in sync. It's just I had to defend. Not
fully understand.
Just lay out. I don't think you were attacking him, so I want to be clear about that. But I had to just lay out more clearly what Michael Render has done and continues to do to help our people. He's just part of the whole. It's a lot of us. We got to put a little extra on our ordinary, so some extraordinary things can begin to happen for our people. And I do believe that there's a role for everybody to play. I really do.
Absolutely. Torrin, I want to allow you to jump in on this topic as well. If you have anything you'd like to add.
Well, I think it's neat. I don't think it's a zero-sum situation. The problems in Black America, the problems that Black America are suffering with are multifaceted problems, and we're going to need multifaceted solutions. Economic, we're going to need policy, we're going to need people who really are concerned about Black people. We need to elect those people in the office, and we also need to get out of this idea, which I'm very tired of just voting and that's it. You can't go vote and sit home. It's not going to work. And I think that's what a lot of people are kind of like. They're getting vote overload, because that's all they're telling you to do is vote. But you see, after the voting is done, what then? You're not seeing any.
Even before the voting is done, how are we involved in selecting the candidates?
There's none of that. You don't see any of that. The only time you see that is every 4 years when it's time to come clap in church and hug your baby. That's pretty much it. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that once you're done voting, and even before you get up to the vote, how are you holding these people you vote accountable? Are you talking to the people who you're putting in these positions to say that this is what the issues are in my community? I need these dealt with. And if they're not dealing with them, are you doing runoffs? Are you holding recounts? Are you holding recalls to get them out of there? There's a lot of different problems. There's a lot of different things we can do outside of just voting to help along our people. So I think it's just a multifaceted. I think it's a multifaceted solution to a lot of these problems.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss as you know, our organization and for me as an education justice advocate, not to bring education, particularly K through 12 education. We can also talk about higher education, particularly when it comes to HBCUs. I really like to hear your thoughts on that, Dr. Ball. But when it comes to K through 12 education, I have been very disappointed in the debates. It hardly came up. I believe it came up tangentially a little bit in the last presidential debate. When it comes to education right now in this country, we have most of our schools are closed or on virtual. We have about 14 million children who don't have access to broadband, meaning they're not learning a damn thing right now, at least formally in education, because lots of our cities don't have adequate broadband coverage for all of the families who need to use it at this time, families who are working from home, families who are essential workers and can't be home to oversee the virtual learning, even if it is happening. Lots of rural communities don't even have the infrastructure. They don't even have the towers for broadband. We haven't talked about this, and we are literally having a generation of children where we already had opportunity gaps, as we know, with African-American children and their white counterparts and others. Schools weren't perfect before. And it's certainly, I would say, an increased issue of opportunity is now lacking when it comes to education. And I wanted to bring that into the discussion because there's a lot of families who are not just on the brink of losing their homes, jobs, and other things like that, but their children are also not at this time getting an education. I wrote a piece early on called School is Essential. And I felt that we needed to start from a place that school is essential, meaning that we needed to get really creative about how we were going to continue to educate our children in this country. Unfortunately, we have not seen leadership at the federal level, and states are left to figure out this thing on their own. Dr. Ball and I started off before we went live just talking about our own kids and what's happening, with all this virtual learning and everything. Senator Turner, I'd love to just, hear from you in terms, I know you're very progressive, in your ideology. Have you been talking about this issue either with folks in your family or just even in your own political spaces? Have you all been talking about how education needs to evolve in this moment?
Yeah, definitely. And all education, as you pointed out, K through 12,
Right.
all the way to college. And by way of example, I know when COVID first hit, and it was very clear that educational institutions from K-12 all the way up to our colleges and universities were going to have to close down. I received messages from people who work at historically black colleges and universities, because it was determined that the young people who were going to have to go home did not have that broadband access. They didn't have what was necessary to be able to keep up with their lessons. And the university or the college didn't have the resources to help them get that. And I named that because the historically colleges and universities are more manageable in terms of this conversation that we're having in terms of their numbers than talking about the entire system itself, just to draw the connection to what you're saying, Sister Zakiya, about the fact that we as a nation have not invested the requisite resources necessary. And what the coronavirus has done has revealed all the fissures in a system. You want to talk about a pandemic? Hell, Black people have been in a pandemic since day zero. Poor people of other walks of life, pandemic since day zero. And we're seeing first of all, the inequality and the inadequacies of the system is not set up, designed, the investments were not made for our children, whether they're in college or whether they're in K through 12, to have the resources that are necessary for them to continue to engage in their learning. And I just want to put a finer point on the fact that historically black colleges and universities, some of them, I won't say all, caring about whether or not those young people will be able to finish their lessons when they're not in a brick and mortar building. It should be troubling to all of us. They don't have big endowments like the Harvards and the Purdues and the Yales. They don't have that. And it really shows the lack of investment in Black education, which we know is it's not the only, one of the greatest equalizers that we have, especially in the 21st century economy. So yes, those conversations are going on with me, not only in my household, but also in some of the progressive circles that I navigate. And then with people who just just care about what they're seeing.
Absolutely. We appreciate that. I'll circle back around to you because my team is working on a platform and campaign around making sure, particularly K through 12 and already marginalized students, Black, brown, and poor kids and otherwise, we're developing something and we'll circle back around to you once we get that developed. So I want to appreciate you for being on, and I want to give our two brothers an opportunity to weigh in on this before we wrap up. I'll start with you, Dr. Ball, since you are a professor at an HBCU.
Oh, wow. I mean, first of all, we're seeing a lot of these issues playing out right now. I mean, even students in my own classes are struggling with an appropriate learning environment, whether it's the having the adequate technology, computers, internet, or whatever, or just being in a space that's conducive to learning. I mean, whether it's K through 12 or even at the college level, a lot of students look forward to the school or the brick and mortar location to get away from spaces that aren't conducive to learning. I mean, even in my relatively bougie existence, with all of us home for COVID, my home isn't conducive for teaching, much less, the conditions that a lot of people are struggling with wherever they are. I mean, we have, we got 2 kids, my wife works, we got a puppy running around. We got neighbors want to, make a lot of noise outside. I mean, it's a constant struggle, and I technically have everything that I need. So that's part of it for sure. What I would like to see, and just very quickly, is that with all this discussion of defunding the police, with some extension to defunding the military, I would love to see some of our political efforts focus more specifically on redirecting those funds to my point about public policy and redistributing GDP, et cetera. Back to these kinds of communities to enhance the educational process, shrink the class size, increase the amount of teachers, all that kind of stuff, increase the pay, particularly at HBCUs of faculty, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot that could be done. And then primarily I would like to see at HBCUs, I would like to see more, if there's a greater redistribution of the existing wealth in this country, then HBCUs would be less required to seek funding from all of the sources that want to only fund STEM related fields, which I think has been shown over the last 40 or 50 years to have been part of a tactic to encourage us at HBCUs away from critical thinking, philosophical, intellectual pursuits, radical ideological pursuits, and strictly channeled all of that efforts into STEM, specifically, which has been shown to limit brilliance, to focus on what would be good for the Defense Department and all that kind of stuff. So all of this I would like to see be part of a broader, political movement to redistribute the wealth that we all helped create, which before COVID was $20 trillion in GDP, plenty of money for everybody.
Thank you for sharing that. I didn't realize that was how much the GDP was. I keep hearing about this deficit that keeps rising up, but I haven't heard about that GDP number. Yeah, we'll definitely.
Because it's the wealth that's created for the people that own the economy. They don't want you to focus on that. They want to talk about mythological deficits and nonsense like that. But anyway, and thank you again for doing this. I appreciate this panel, having been part of it. Thank you very much.
You're definitely coming back, Dr. Ball, because you had the whole comment section jumping about this. Like when you start talking about capitalism, people are like, what? Wait, what? We ain't supposed to own no business.
That's not what I said.
Come on in, Brother Torrey. I want to give you an opportunity also to share as we continue to wrap up, and we want to respect everybody's time. We've gone on a little bit, but wanted to hear your closing thoughts as well. And if you have any thoughts on education, you can share that as well.
Okay, well, I can't really speak to education, but what I can speak to is the fact that what this pandemic has really done, as Sister Nina said, it's really laid bare the structural inequalities in education in this system. And I think this is something that really, if we're going to talk about voting and the power of voting, this is something that we can really touch on about how local elections and who you vote for and what issues you put in front of your communities can affect how your kids are educated and how they're raised. If you are if you don't care about the political system as far as like the presidential part of it, there are so many different things that are important on your local level that affect these very things that we're talking about right now, like where funds are allocated, where cell phone towers are allocated, whether there's spaces that kids who as Dr. Ball said, may not be in places that are conducive to learning, can go somewhere where there's Wi-Fi access, where they can get online and they can take their class, and that's from K through 12 through up to the college level. So I think these things are really important to talk about. And I think it's important to get these things on local agendas and get people out in front of these things so people can have these conversations and maybe in effect change that way.
Absolutely. Well, this has been, I knew we were going to go over, this has been probably one of my most engaging episodes, which I knew it would be. We had Senator Turner on, Dr. Ball and Torin Walker. Thank you all so much for being here. We are 1 week, 6 days away from the presidential election. And so we will hopefully know who our next president will be in a week from now. I do plan on hosting another roundtable conversation post-election, because I do think as African Americans, we need to be putting on pressure on anybody. As soon as Biden's in there, ain't nobody, it's not a cakewalk, period. You know, we've got to push him when it comes to our community. Clearly, we didn't even talk about his plan, Lift Every Voice, Jesus Christ. But anyway, we will definitely have to bring some of these folks back. Senator Turner, thank you. Appreciate you. So grateful. Absolutely. So grateful for everything that you continue to do on behalf of the great state of Ohio and Cleveland and all around the nation. Thank you, Dr. Ball. Thank you, Torin Walker. I will be seeing y'all soon and definitely going to be engaging y'all on social media. This has been great. Until next week, we will have Akil Parker, who is a professor at Cheney University, and he will also be talking about African-centered math. So don't miss that episode. That's a real thing, African-centered math. Peace, y'all.